Okay, so the parsha this week is Chayei Sarah. It's page 122, 123. So there's a couple of main stories here. Let's go through that and then we'll talk about it. So at the beginning, it talks about, it literally says, Vayu Chayei Sarah me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim. And it says, okay, the life of Sarah was 127 years, right? And then it says that she died in Kiryat Arba, which is in Hebron, right? So we talked about this a lot. Hebron, she died in Hebron. She died in. So he wasn't. He didn't. It was Hebron, but he didn't own the land yet, right? Here in this parsha is where he buys the Me'arat Machpelah. So she dies in Hebron. And Abraham engages in a negotiation with this guy who owns the cave where he wants to bury her, and this guy's name is Ephron Hachiti, I think. So, and they have this negotiation. It's really interesting because Ephron says, "Listen, I'll just give it to you. We're friends. I'll just give it to you." Abraham doesn't want to have that, right? He says, "No, I want to pay you." And then the guy cleverly says, "What's 400 pieces of silver between you and me?" He gave him the price, right? He told him the price. So Abraham's like, "Okay, I'll give you the 400 things." And it actually says he did it to him. He did it in front of everybody. If you look at verse 12, he said he did it in front of the local people, right? He gave them the money. There were witnesses that he gave it. And he did negotiate. Well, no, Abraham didn't. The other, and actually, it was kind of a negotiation, but not really on price in a way. So he's really interesting because he wanted to make sure he paid, because he didn't want this guy coming back to him later and saying, "It's mine. I did you a favor." Right. He didn't want to owe it. And if you think about it, it's the same as what happened when he fought those kings 2 weeks ago, when he took the booty. He could have taken the booty from the other kings that they defeated. And Abraham says, "No, I'm not taking even a shoelace. Just pay my men what they deserve, and that's it." So here, similarly, he's like, I'm doing it. I don't want to owe anybody anything, basically, right? I'm paying for it. It's mine." So when you think about it, this is the first purchase by Jews in Eretz Yisrael. This is it. And the amazing thing is, we can go there today, right? We can go to this exact spot today. So I know I've told you guys. So when I went there last year, it was the first time I was ever there. If you go, I would recommend highly go. It's dangerous. People are scared. Yeah, go. It's the one of the most important places in our culture, right? Our ancestors are buried there. And Eyal Sagi actually asked me the other day. We were just talking about being in Israel or something, some trip or something, and he said, when you went, he said, did you feel more religious, more spiritual, or anything like that? I said not. I didn't feel like more religious, but I did feel more connected to my ancestors. That I could say. Like I was standing there, and I was like, wow, my ancestors are buried there.
You feel that everywhere in Israel.
That's true, but here it's like they're there. They're buried there.
So I felt like I belonged here.
Right. That's for sure in Israel generally.
I have friends who go to Israel, like I'm going to Long Island.
Right.
I had a great feeling when I went there once.
Right.
Would I have that same feeling if I went there 5 times or 6 times?
Yeah.
Just one,
Yeah. There's just something. There's like something about it. It's hard to even explain. But there's just.
It's almost mythical. Right?
Yeah. It's like.
I didn't want to go. Whoever friends told us that.
Give me.
As the plane started and it started to see you, like I well done.
Yeah.
And then when we went to the wall,
somebody makes somebody a great wife.
Right.
And that's how we got to the wall.
Right. Sure. Sure. Now people don't even go that way. If you're Jewish, you don't even go that way anymore. I used to go that way too when it was 30 years. Now you go to the side through the Armenian quarter and you go around.
He's been in Israel 6 times. And he's only 26 years old.
Wow.
And he loves it.
But he's
better and better each time he goes.
He's not there to stay.
No. He goes. He's been to all the sites. He's been there with 2 different groups. He's been there with Yehudi, which is a birthright of Florida. They take all the college kids in Florida, and then with birthright. And every time it's different heights. He says he
No,
doesn't
it's-
want to live there, but he would always visit there. If he could visit there once a year, he would go every.
Yeah, there's just
Doesn't
something.
get boring.
There's something about it, and like Mark said, it's like the whole country. Everywhere you go, there's historical spots. Everywhere you go, there's something to be connected to. So this one is just, I think, a little more because that's where our ancestors actually are buried. So, and for me, it was even more because I was saying Kaddish for my mother. So I davened for the Amid there. I davened Mincha there. It was like, you're trying to hold it together a little bit. You're davening for your mother in the place where your ancestors are buried. It's like a little bit much. But this is where it comes from, right? This is exactly where he bought the property, right? And like I said, he was obviously well known to the people there, and he was very respected. So basically, he buries her, and then it immediately goes into the next thing, which is that.
Was he older than her?
I think so, yeah. So now he wants to find a bride for Yitzchak, right? So he tells his servant Eliezer to go to basically Abraham's homeland where he comes from, and he says, "Don't take a bride from the people around here, from my family. He wants only from the family." And he makes him swear for Yitzchak. And remember we talked about how they would do agreements and swearing, and actually it's here also. He says, "Place your hand under my thigh to swear an oath." That's how they used to do it. They used to
Right.
put their hand over here, and that's how they actually used to do it. We were talking last week about the Bein HaBetarim when they split the animals, and that used to walk through between the animals. So Eliezer agrees. He swears to it. He goes. And he sees Rivka. Rivka's depending on what the different interpretations, how old she is. But there's no way she was. No matter what, she was a young girl, and they.
Somebody said she was 12.
Right, but you know what? In those days,
12 was
12 was
legit.
fine. It was
Yeah.
legit. So
How old is Yitzchak?
I don't know. That's a good question. You know what? I don't know.
108.
So
I don't know.
so he goes.
What they talk about?
And-
It's 108, she's 12.
And she actually he sees her, and she brings water she comes over and rushes to bring water for his camels, and then she explains who she is, and he asks for if he could stay by them because he realizes that it's family to his master. So they stay there, and then when he realizes that this is the right family, he praises God and he says, "Listen, I want to bring her back for Abraham's son." And what's really interesting is they all agree, and then when he's ready to go, they say, "Let her stay a year, 10
Right.
months." Then he's like, "No, we got to get out of here."
Who's
And
having this conversation? I missed it.
Eliezer, the slave, no, the servant of Abraham. Abraham sent him
Right,
to
and-
get
and
to
he's
find,
going to-
and he found Abraham's family there, and he finds Rivka, and now they're talking, and he gave them jewelry, and then all of a sudden they want him to stay. So he says. So it reminds me later on we're going to read about Yaakov when Yaakov wanted to leave after he married the sisters, and his father-in-law was like, "Oh, why don't you stay? You could stay a little bit." He wanted to get the hell out of there. It's actually a similar thing. He doesn't want to hang around, right? These people, I didn't look into it at all, what different commentaries say, but when I read it, I'm like, yeah, they had something nefarious up, that they wanted him to stay.
Well, they wanted to marry her off to one of them.
There was something going on, I think, but he was too smart, and he's like, "Well, really, I need to go." So they say, "We'll ask the girl." So they call her, and they ask, and she says, "I'll go." Basically, she's like, they said, "Do you want to go?" She says, "I'll go." So their house, I think, was like it was probably a little bit not a healthy home. That's what I take away from it. And then they go, and she sees as they approach, she sees Yitzchak in the field, and it says the word in Hebrew is like lesocheach, which means like to talk. He's like wandering around in the field, but what the tradition is that he was actually davening mincha, Yitzchak is the individual that we credit with creating the prayer mincha, the afternoon prayer. He was wandering around in the field. The tradition is that he was praying. He was praying mincha in the afternoon, and he sees her, and they see each other, and then it's very sweet. Actually, it says. Where is it? It says he falls in love with her. He sees her, and then it says.
Sounds like the Bachelor.
Then he says he brought her to the tent of his mother's tent, and then it says he married her, and then it says ve'ahaveha, and he fell in love with her. It's like very sweet. I don't know. You don't usually see that, I think, in the Torah. He fell in love with her, and then he was comforted after his mother died. So his mother died, and he was upset about his mother dying, and he finds actually the love of his life, and he's okay.
So when you first met her, Sarah was still alive?
No,
No.
she was already dead. So then there's a little bit of genealogy right at the end, right? Avraham goes back to Hagar, who comes back. Remember, she was thrown out. Comes back to Hagar. He has some more kids, and eventually he passes away. And then they talk about the descendants of Yishmael. And actually, what's interesting in also is that when Avraham dies, it says that he was buried by his sons. So by Isaac and Yishmael. So also the tradition is that Yishmael was a choser b'tshuva. He wasn't a good guy, and he became more righteous later, and he came back and buried him. So and that's basically the story. That's last week there were a lot of little stories. There was a lot going on. Here there's a lot of important stories. But there's not a lot of them. There's like three important stories, and that's it. So I just want to go back to the beginning of the parsha where he buys the land. So it's really interesting. So the commentaries, there were different commentaries on what happened there. So he buys the land. So some of the commentaries say it was one of the trials that he had to undergo. Right, there were like 10 things that he had to undergo to, I guess, prove his worth. Right, so one of them was the sacrificing of Yitzchak, and some say that another one was that he had to buy this land because God promised him the land. So why didn't he just get it? Why did he have to kind of argue with this guy, kind of fight over it just to get it? So some say that is one of the trials. The Ramban, Nachmanides, he says that, it was a trial, but also it was a blessing, right? Because what happened was, we mentioned that he did this deal, he did it in front of all the people there, and the people held him up to very high esteem. So that was a fulfillment of God's promise that he would make a name for Avraham. And we talked about that, right? We talked about it like 2 weeks ago with the tower. The problem was with the building the tower, that they said they were making a name, but it was very selfish and using technology for a bad purpose. God promised Avraham, I'll make a name for him. Right after that, a few verses after that, God promises Avraham, I'll make a name for him. Right. This is it, right? So then where he fulfilled the promise of making a name for Avraham was right here. Right, when he bought it and everybody was out there. So which is it? Right. So the question is, which is it? Is it that it was a hardship, or was it a blessing? Right. So I came across, this is really cool. This is Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Schiffman. He's in the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs Institute, and you'll listen to this and you'll see why he's influenced by Rabbi Sachs, because we talked about this I think last week. So he brings an interpretation from Rabbi Simcha Zissel Broidy, who was the former Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva in Hebron. Right? And he died in 2000, and he did a commentary on the Ramban, and he said that it's not either or, right? It's not either was it a blessing or was it a hardship? He said it was, how is the test was, how is Avraham going to relate, and what's his mindset going to be when he's faced with a hardship? Is it just a hardship, or is he being able to see the blessing within the hardship. Does it sound familiar? That we talked about this with Rabbi Sachs, said this very similar thing when it came to the sacrifice, almost sacrifice of Yitzchak, right? He said the test was, how is Abraham doing in uncertainty? He didn't know, he knew he was promised certain things, but he saw opposite stuff going on. How does he deal with it? So this guy brings this rabbi who says a similar idea, right? He had a haggle for the land, but was there a fulfillment of a blessing within there? And then interestingly,
So the hardship is that he had a bargain
that
for the land?
that he had
hardship?
a struggle
Okay.
for land, yeah, instead of just getting it, right? He had to actually deal with this guy. So
Well, you had to pay for it.
right, but he had to like it didn't just come to him. He had to like work for it, basically.
Wouldn't the hardship also be burying his wife? Or
That's
that
a
was-
separate deal. That's human nature. That's
Yeah.
not, she died.
You know, it's
that's,
like you're not your full state of mind,
I don't think. I think that was, burying his wife and having to deal with it at the
Right,
same time.
just-
Yes.
and dealing
Yes.
with
Yes.
it.
Underneath,
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and negotiating for
Yes.
her burial.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. So interestingly, this guy also brings up DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, which I mentioned a couple of times, right? It's a type of therapy. So one of the things about DBT is that they teach you, they stress being able to have two thoughts in your head at the same time, two opposite thoughts. Why? Because they deal with people who have depression. So they they train you, they teach you that if you're having bad thoughts, you can also appreciate good things that are happening at the same time. You don't have to go into a spiral, right? It's okay to think of two things at the same time, even though they're opposite. Bad thing happened, that's terrible. But there's good things also. And that's actually, there's no black and white. You can have, it's okay to do it, which is actually why and DBT is based on Buddhist thinking, right? That there's opposites can exist at the same time. That's why I think Judaism as a culture is more Eastern than Western, because Westerners always say either or, either or, either or. That's not a Jewish way of thinking. It's just that we've lived in the West for 2,000 years, so we've adopted a foreign way of thinking. It's not our way of thinking. Our indigenous way of thinking.
A foreign perspective of our
Yeah,
own.
yeah. But so we've adopted it because that's normal, right? We live
DBT
in it.
stands for what, again?
Dialectical behavior therapy. So, but that's not our natural indigenous way of thinking when we were where we were, and even now it shouldn't be. We kind of have to jettison their way of thinking a little bit, right? Because it doesn't work for us so well. We're Easterners, really, more than Westerners. We're a mix, but which is why they have trouble figuring us out. But it's not either or. You can have two opposite ideas in your head at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that, and that was
Wouldn't one cancel out the other?
no. That's the whole point. That's exactly the point. That's what a Westerner would say. One cancels out the other. They can coexist. Yin and yang. They can coexist
In
at the
Eastern
same
philosophy,
time.
they always do.
Right. And that's why I actually think that
That's where they draw their strength.
we're more like an Eastern philosophy in our culture than a Western philosophy. It's just that we've been co-opted and we've adopted their way of thinking, which it's not. It's fine. It's an okay way of thinking, but it's not our way of thinking, right? That's it. It's okay. It's not a judgment, but it's not our way of thinking, and we have a lot of trouble thinking our way because we've been our minds have been literally have been colonized.
Nothing's ever final.
Things aren't
Things
fun.
always in perpetual
They're
motion.
in perpetual motion, and it's not either or all the time, right? Sometimes obviously, sometimes it will be, but it doesn't have to be. And our minds have been colonized by them, and we have to break that colonization.
In the Eastern philosophy, light and dark have to exist together.
Right, and we
You
actually
can't be one
so
without-
funny. So light and dark.
This way, the transition is always happening.
So we talked about it with Breshit, right? It's exactly what we talked about in Breshit, right? It says Vayi erev vayvoker yom rishon, right? God created. There was light, there was dark, there was one day because they had to exist together to have the one day, to have a whole. Exactly right. Exactly. So according to Rabbi Brody, that was his test. is he going to be able to see God's blessings even though he was going through a hardship, right? And that is the lesson that we learn from our ancestors. Now, here's an interesting thing that kind of dovetails into that from the Breslover Rebbe, who you guys know I like also. So he was talking in this parsha, because they're talking about Yitzchak finding his wife, finding Rivka. So they were talking about finding the right person, right? How do you find the right person? What's the right person? It's not an easy thing, as we all know. So he said, Rabbi Nachman says that it's exactly fitting different things together. You don't have to be a perfect match and have the same interests as your spouse, right? You don't have to. And he brings this example. He says, in Hebrew, the word when they talk about in Breshit, when they talk about Shamayim, is actually, which means the sky. It actually is a combination of two words: Eish, fire, and Mayim, Shamayim, fire and water. So he says, so to have Shamayim, you have to bring these two opposite things together. And then he says, so the world was created according to the Talmud on the basis of din, justice, right? But the world can't exist on justice alone. It also needs mercy, rachamim, right? And those two are important to be together. Yitzchak represents din. That was his characteristic. The same way we always talk about Abraham's characteristic was chesed, Yitzchak's was din, right? But Rivka's was mercy. So they were a good match together. Mercy and justice, they're kind of opposites, but they work together. And it's because they were able to work together, they were a good match for each other, and they were the ones who were the progenitors of our people, exactly because of that. Okay, so I just want to talk about the Haftarah a little bit, and then we'll close up with a nice thing from the Rebbe. So if you look at the Haftarahs, I love these. So this is like a personal thing for me. So if you look at the Haftarahs for this week and last week, so the Haftarah this week talks about that's on page 1299. So the Haftarah this week talks about the what's the word when the kingship passes to somebody else. Succession. Thank you. It talks about the succession from King David, right? He's very old, and one of his sons, Adoniah, goes and he brings in some of the powerful men, the heroes, and he has this whole dinner and he has a feasting, and he says, "I'm the king." But King David had promised it to Shlomo, right, to Solomon. So Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, comes with one of the other, with Natan, the prophet, and comes to King David and says, "Listen, you promised us. Those guys are out there. They're celebrating his new kingship. Meantime, they excluded us, and you promised it to us." And King David says, "You're right," and he exclaims that they're going to be. Solomon and Shlomo is going to be the king. What's interesting here is right at the beginning of it, it's got nothing to do with the whole succession issue. Right at the beginning, it says King David was old, right? He couldn't get warm, right? So his advisors say, "We're going to bring a girl in to warm him up," right? And not to sleep with him. She's not going to be the queen. She's not even going to have kids. He's too old. They find this girl. Her name is Avishag Hashunamit. Her name is Avishag Hashunamit, means the person from the town of Shunem in Israel, which I know we like maps. I like maps. So I'll hand out a map in a second, right? And we'll see where it is. So it says she asked, it says, "V'hana'ara yafa ad ma'od," she's very beautiful. "V'atihi lamelech sochenet," and she was a sochenet to the king. And they translate the word sochenet as warmer, right? That's what she did. She was a warmer. So if you look here, I've made it. She was a cuddler, which my dog doesn't do, but she did. So if you look over here, here's the town of Shunem, which you can see is actually pretty far from Jerusalem.
Oh yeah. It's in the Galil, Golan, whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty high up,
Yeah,
right?
Galil.
And she better
So-
stay that way,
So she's from Shunem, right? Now,
not from town.
so now this town Shunem, by happenstance, also appears in last week's Haftorah, right? In last week's Haftorah, there's a prophet named Elisha, and Elisha has an aide named Gehazi, and whenever he travels around, he passes this woman's house. It never doesn't say her name. It says she's a Shunamite. She's from Shunem, and she's apparently a very wealthy woman. And whenever he passed her, she told her husband, set up a table and a lamp and a bed for Elisha, the prophet. Whenever he passes, he can stay by us comfortably. And the husband does it. So Elisha says, I want to do something for her. She's very kind to me. I want to do something for her. What do you need? What do you need from me? What do you want me to do for you? And she says something that to me, I want this on my headstone. It says, she says, Vatomer betoch ami anochi yoshavet. I sit with my people. He's asking her, do you need anything? And her answer is, I sit with my people. I'm happy with my people. It's unbelievable,
Does
right?
he want a tombstone?
It would be okay. I like Jewish people. So that's it. So that's all she wants. So he asks his servant, his aide, Gehazi, he says, what does this woman need? You know, she doesn't want to take anything. So she doesn't want to take anything. She's doing all this chesed and she doesn't want to take anything. So Gehazi says to her,
Says it by definition not to accept anything back.
it's to do
good
it's to
things.
do a very good thing that you don't get a benefit from.
Right.
You don't get a benefit. So exactly. So she doesn't want anything. So Gehazi says, well, she doesn't have a child. So the prophet says, Elisha says, you're going to have a child. And she does. So one day the child is working in the field, and it seems like he gets some kind of heat stroke. He calls to his father, they're working in the field, and he says, my head, and he passes out. They bring him to the mother, and it looks like he's dead. He's dead. So it's amazing. So what she does is, she goes,
It's not a good story.
listen to this. So she goes to the husband. Don't forget, this woman she's running the household. You can see she's tough, she's wealthy, she's running the show. So she goes, she calls to her husband, and she says, send me one of the lads and one of the donkeys. I will rush to the godly man and come back. And he says to her, why are you going to him today? It's not the new moon or the Sabbath when you usually go to him. It's like, why are you going there? She says, all is well. She doesn't even answer her husband. She doesn't say the kid's dead. She doesn't say anything. She's like, don't give me, I want the donkey and the kid. That's it. I don't want to talk to you. She takes the donkey and the kid. She
Five
goes
Pounds
up.
Wife. It's written here.
Seriously, she's like tough cookie, right? So she saddles up the donkey and she says to the lad, "Get going. Don't go slowly because of me unless I tell you. Go." Right? She goes. She finds Gehazi, right? And he asks her, "What's going on? Are you okay?" And she says, "Everything is well." She's not saying, it's unbelievable. She's like not saying anything, right? But then when she goes to Elisha, the prophet, she grabs hold of him, and Elisha understands right away that there's something wrong. Different than, remember when we read about Hannah when she was crying at the Mishkan, and the high priest didn't know what was going on. He thought she was drunk. Here, this guy has even more insight. He sees right away that there's something not right, and he says, "What's going on?" And she says, "Did I ask you for a baby? Did I ask you for anything? I didn't ask for anything. And then my kid is dead. Saddle up." He says, "Let's go, saddle up." And if you read it, it seems like he does some kind of CPR. It's like he lies down on the kid, he puts his eyes on his eyes, his mouth on his mouth. The kid sneezes 7 times or something. The kid sneezes, gets up and walks around. It sounds like it's some kind of CPR. And then at the end, this is amazing. He says to her, "Pick up your child." And she says, she fell down at his feet, prostrated herself. She gathered up the son and left. Again, this woman's all business, right? That's it. She grabs up the kid, and that's it. So these women in this town of Shunem, right? This woman is a wealthy woman doing a tremendous chesed. She's not asking for anything. Tough cookie. This other woman who's just heating up, she's also not doing anything. But what's the connection? So there's an amazing thing I read, and it's not necessarily like a religious thing. So this guy, Professor Daniel Bodie, so he does this analysis of the word sochenet. She's called a sochenet, a warmer, right? Rashi said it's a warmer. There were all these other interpretations. This guy says no. He says no. He says it means an administrator, and like a palace steward, right? And he goes back and he looks at other Semitic languages, and he says that it means that women back then, that was their job. They had like even Jewish women in certain states, they had a stamp. They found stamps with women's names. They were official stamps, right? So what he says is that's how do you think that these people were able to get to see the king? Bathsheba, Natan, these people came to the king to say, hey, the wrong person's getting the kingship. How'd they get in to see the king? It was this Avishag Hashunamit. She was the king's administrator. She wasn't just the warmer. She was the administrator, right? And she was a witness to the transaction when King David says, okay, it's for you.
Shlomo.
David says Shlomo will be king, right? So these women in Shunem were not. They were something special. They were something special, right? They were tough. They were smart. They were kind, and that is the connection to this parsha. Now, I don't even think it's so much arguably, it's not so much the succession issue. We see that Rivka, and we'll talk about why. Rivka is appropriate for Yitzchak, right? It's got to do with chesed, which we'll talk about in a second. But the whole chesed thing comes out also in this Haftorah, because this girl from Shunem, she did a chesed. She wasn't expecting anything back. She was an administrator for the king, and she was a warmer for the king. She was not going to have nobody was going to inherit the crown. She wasn't having kids with him. She was leaving home from far away to go be with the king and help him. She didn't ask for anything. And of course, the woman from last week, it's only a week ago, that woman is also from the same town, and she asked for nothing in return. And I think that's the connection between the Haftorah this week. Last week's Haftorah was different, but these women in Shunem were something special, and I think our wives very often live up to that. Inherited from all these women here. So how we just mentioned, so the idea of chesed and that Rivka was appropriate to inherit the mantle of Sarah because of chesed. There were 3 miracles that happened as long as Sarah was alive. There was a cloud of glory outside the tent, which was, like when they traveled across for 40 years in the desert. The Shabbos candles that she would stayed lit for a week. Don't ask me. It was before they got the Torah. How they know about Shabbos candles? This is what it says. They did certain things that we do, I guess.
Is it Sarah?
Sarah, right. And there was something special about the challah she made. Sorry? That's what they say here, right. There's no evidence other than our tradition. It doesn't say anything in the Torah that she lit Shabbos candles. But our tradition is that our ancestors, even before the Torah was given, kept the Torah, or parts of the Torah that were relevant. It was like, to my mind, it was kind of a tradition, right? They were a clan, and they had clan traditions, and they kept those traditions, and that was from Abraham, from God. So, and then there was something with the challah which I didn't really understand. There was something with the bread she made that was also a miracle. When she died, those three things stopped. But when Yitzchak married Rivka, they started again, right? And the chesed part of it, if you remember last week, right, when the angels came to tell Avraham they were going to have a baby, it says Abraham hurried to get food for them, and he told Sarah, hurry up and bring food for them, right? And if you look at this week's Parsha, when Eliezer, the servant, first sees Rivka, it says Rivka hurried home to tell her parents, and uses the same word, miharu, from the word maher, right? Miharu. It's the same word in all three times, right? Well, Abraham, that word, Sarah, and Rivka. I think that's the hint to us that she was a worthy successor, because the same hastening to do good thing, a chesed for another person that they don't know, right? She didn't know who Eliezer was. That's the thing that tied them together. And as far as the lighting the candles, that the candles stayed lit all week. So this is a very Chabad thing, obviously, about lighting candles and tefillin. That's like their big thing, right? So the Rebbe said that when they lit the candles and it stayed lit all week, that brought light to their home. And you know that the Shabbos candles, when you look at them, they're very calming, right? The end of Friday, it's very calming. So the idea is for us, no matter what your religious observance is, doesn't matter. But it's a good idea to light candles Friday night. Then you can go about your business. I'm not saying everybody has to be Shomer Shabbat. I'm not saying that. But it's a nice idea to light the candles. And to the extent our kids are all older, so everybody's out of the house. But if the kids are around, light the candles. It's a calming thing. And that lighting of it, it's a physical manifestation of a concept of calm. And it's a good thing if we do that we can hopefully internalize that and have it in our home all week. Sarah and Rivka actually had it lit all week. We don't have that, but maybe we can have that kind of spirit all week. And that's the message of the Rebbe. That's a very important thing to light candles Friday night. Should be a good week. And this is Dave's sponsored in honor of his
Thank
son's.
you, Dave, by the way.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Oh wait, it's in honor of the son's engagement. They should have a marriage as strong and powerful as our ancestors had.
Amen.